In the previous video, we successfully were able to duplicate this gradient here. And now we're going to work on this one. And we could do the same thing here where we go in and inspect this gradient and take it apart and build the pieces. But I want to show you kind of a neat other thing that we can do if you've got perhaps a slightly more complex gradient, something worth trying here. So what I could do is I can actually export this layer from Photoshop, and we could do the exact same thing over in this Photopia thing here, where I could come down here to this layer and I could do file, export layers. So I can export that layer there, or maybe I could do it right from here. I'm not seeing export layer, but you can export the layers from that menu there to generate just an image of the layer. But I'm going to do it in Photoshop over here. So I can click on this gradient 2 here. So that's this one here, and click on this layer here, and right click and choose export layer. It's in here somewhere. To do. Quick export is PNG. I think that's what I want. So that allows me to just save this one layer on my desktop here. So I have a file that is really, if I open it up right over there, but it's really just that layer as a PNG file. So that's pretty cool. And so now I have that, I can go and try to import that and have the gradient generator create the gradient for it. This one has an upload image, but I've never gotten it to work very well. We can try doing that here. We can go get that gradient and try to do it. But you'll see it doesn't really give us the gradient that we need. Over here, this is another gradient generator, and this one seems to work fairly well. This is a much older generator. This has been here for many, many years, this gradient generator, and kind of looks a little bit old school. But if you click on import image here, choose the file, and choose that gradient and import, you'll see you get something. It's not really exactly the right thing, and it's going the wrong direction. We want it to go, I think, not that way, the other way. Like that, there we go. And it's not quite right. We could probably slide these things over a bit to get it a little bit closer. But I still think that that's pretty cool for doing this kind of thing. And you can see down here, this sort of syntax is not something you would want to have to write by hand, but we can actually copy it. Just that line there for background, and then come over to our Visual Studio Code and go and make a rule for bound box 2 and paste it in there. Save that. And then if we come over and look at our page, it's not perfect, but still, that's pretty good. We could probably move that stuff over a little bit if we wanted to fuss with it more, but we're getting something pretty close to what we have here. So that's kind of neat. So yeah, so we can do that as well. Now, I want to say a few more things about gradients before we move on to the next one. And that is that gradients kind of come in and out of fashion in web design. Sometimes they're kind of in and sometimes they're kind of out, depending on sort of what the trends are. And gradients can do a couple of different things. Like you can do something like this. It's very subtle. You can do something a little bit more extreme. You can do something that looks like, something's got sort of a 3D feeling to it. Like it's like lights bending around it, like it's a pole of some sort or another. If you do that, you want to make sure that if it's horizontal, that you're putting the light kind of on the top rather than the bottom, because that if it comes up from the bottom, it starts to look a little bit, it feels like it goes against gravity in a way. And so you don't want to do that. But that's not the only ways in which people are using gradients. sometimes people do, designers have used gradients in much more wild ways. And this was sort of started, kind of came into prominence back with iOS 7 logo back in, the early 2010s. This kind of gradient thing where you're going from color to color to color, sort of, and these kinds of gradients do come in and out of popularity here. Also, or you might want to use them. They have much less to do with light and much more about to do with color and sort of doing that kind of thing. But something to pay attention to is that if you're going to make that kind of gradient here, suppose you're going to go from on one end, like a red, very bright red, and on the other end, a very bright blue. Suppose you're going to create a gradient like this, or maybe I'm going to go red to green. Maybe that's what it should do. I'll make it even more obvious. What happens is generally the gradient algorithm is going to kind of go straight through the color circle. And so you end up with these colors in the middle that are kind of muddy. It's not really red, it's not really green, it's not really something else. They just get kind of muddy. And so there has been sort of some goals to sort of make gradient generators that instead of going straight through the color wheel and taking the shortest route from this color to that color, to kind of go around the color wheel. And this guy created a gradient generator that does that. So you can pick these colors and you'll notice that you're getting kind of a rich transition from one color to another rather than going straight through the color wheel. And then you'll notice down here, it's actually it's going around the color wheel, and it's actually creating all of these stops along the way, even though I really only have two colors here that I'm going between. It's creating all these stops kind of around the color wheel. So that's pretty cool. If you're interested in gradients and sort of thinking about doing some interesting things with gradients, think about like how they're going to look as you go from one color to another. I mean, if you're keeping it fairly monochromatic, like what I have for this one here, then it's not such a big deal. But otherwise, it's kind of interesting.